Welcome to episode 257 of Silver Lining for Learning. I'm Chris Dede from Harvard. I'm joined by my co-host Punya Mishra from ASU, Kurt Bonk from Indiana University, the currently triumphant football team, and Lydia Cao from the University of Toronto. And I'm very excited about the episode today, which is on immersive authentic simulations. Much of my work over the last quarter century has been in different forms of immersive simulations. And some of it has been with one of our three guests, Rhonda. And it just has such power. And now with Gen AI, that's kind of thrown a whole new set of possibilities into the mix. So this is one of our episodes that really is about a technology that on the one hand is proven, but on the other hand, it's still emergent. It's still changing and shifting and evolving in ways that are really exciting. So I'll ask each of our guests to talk a little bit about themselves and what led them to this point in their research related to teacher capacity building and teacher education using simulations for rehearsals. So we'll begin with Lisa.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Lisa Dieker. I jokingly tell people my last name rhymes with Beaker in case you ever want to know how to pronounce it. And my work has always been in the STEM area. And I'm the daughter of a mechanic. So I'm a first-gen college student. And my dad taught me that, if you want to do something different, you take something apart, put it back together in a new way, and you get a different outcome. And so I started my career. I went to the University of Illinois, Eastern Illinois, started a community college, but started my career at UW Milwaukee. And this will date me a bit, but it'll be a good laugh for the group. I became the expert on how to stream video so you could use it in your class, called AKA before YouTube. And so I began to realize that I love the people at Milwaukee, but there wasn't enough innovation there in the tech space. Great people and great place to work. And I'd been co-teaching all my classes with a math and science professor. So I really had learned a lot about interdisciplinary work. I then went to the University of Central Florida, and I remember the job interview, and they were like, and we have this simulation lab and we do this. And I was like, I have to have this job. And luckily they chose me. So I was there for 20 years. I had the privilege of holding the Lockheed Martin Mathematics and Science Endowed Professorship. And I worked across special ed. So special education is my discipline. But here's the real funny story of how the work I did in simulations started. I had a provost fellowship, and I was invited with three other disciplines to come up with a problem of practice. And we all decided to focus on simulation. And so I said, hey, we'd like a simulator to prepare teachers. And the very first time, my favorite story to tell, they gave me a circle and said, stand here and say the following things. Good morning, class. I'm like, well, what if I don't want to say good morning? They're like, well, you have to if you're going to do a simulator. And what I realized very quickly is the research in simulation was very narrow. It had mostly been done in military and health and aviation. And it had never been researched because you don't do randomized controlled trial studies on pilots, surgeons. At least I'm not flying on the plane that was in the study that didn't get trained in that. And so it became this whole new problem of practice. It was then through that interdisciplinary collaboration that we created what was first known as Teach Me, that moved to Teach Live. Teach Me was a doggy diaper, and so we weren't allowed to use that as our trademark, so we had to change the name to Teach Live, if you just want to hear some funny stories. And so long story fast forward, Gates Foundation came along and funded us. Lockheed helped us think about simulation and training, and the first simulation was born. That was then commercialized by Immersion, and I just have to acknowledge computer scientist Charlie Hughes, dear friend forever, just retired, and Mike Hines, a mathematician, were really the core team that helped launch that work, as well as a whole cadre of interactors. That simulator now has an interactor in the loop, but we've now been doing new research where we're using the simulator to train AI agents to take some of that work out of the loop, and just finished doing that with young kids with autism, providing a AI agent to help them self-regulate that was created using the simulator. I've used the simulator in police force, hospitality, cyberbullying, behavior training, you name it, in rehearsals in all areas. And now I just 2 years ago moved to the University of Kansas, where I serve in the Flight Center, which is flexible learning through innovation in technology and education. And we're actually trying to use the simulator and other rehearsal strategies to look at the neurophysiological state of teacher mind and body. Believe it or not, no one has really looked at nonverbal behavior of teachers. So that's kind of where my work is leading now. And we're doing that in partnership, even with some people in nursing. So that's my journey, and I'm excited to talk at any point in time, but I thought I'd give you a little humor as we got started.
Thank you so much. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Cohen. I'm a professor at the University of Virginia in the School of Education and Human Development. And I have to give a huge shout out to Lisa because she really launched me on my simulation journey about a decade ago. So Lisa came and gave a talk at UVA talking about her work in simulation. And I looked at my dean at the time, Bob Pianta, and I said, we have to figure out a way to incorporate this in our programs here. And for me, there was a tremendous amount of potential in terms of what we could help teachers and other educational professionals learn how to practice. But I also saw a lot of potential in using simulations as a kind of standardized assessment platform so that we could more precisely track what teachers were doing over time and how their skills were developing in response to different kinds of interventions. So over the last 10 years, I have dedicated myself in many ways to trying to do those kinds of experiments to try to understand how we can leverage this technology as effectively and efficiently in service of promoting teacher skill development. So we've run over a dozen randomized control trials and found pretty consistently that simulated practice really does expedite teacher skill development, but only, and this is very important point to me, only when it's coupled with coaching in between cycles of practice. So I have a new paper that's out in the Journal of Educational Psychology that's called Practice Does Not Make Perfect. And so to me, that's really like the heart of what we've learned, which is that repeated practice alone can actually be quite detrimental, that if we don't disrupt, especially novices' views about a space as complex as teaching, that they can a lot of times double down on really negative perspectives they have about kids, not kind of see the locus of control in terms of instructional interactions as living within them. They blame kids, blame their families, blame the communities in which schools are situated for things that are really their responsibility, the skills that they really need to develop to be able to facilitate strong teacher-student interactions. So my work's really been about simulation, but also about coaching. And the other kind of key piece that we've learned over time is that what comes before and after these cycles of simulated practice and coaching, that's just as important too. That teachers need schema. They need to really understand what they're practicing and why it's helpful for kids. So over the last decade, we've also built out a series of async learning modules to help teachers understand the practices that they're going to be working on in the simulator, what kids struggle with in terms of the mathematical concepts or, the literacy concepts. And then we've built a series of tip sheets that help facilitate transfer into real classroom so that they can see that these are lessons that are not just about teaching student avatars, they're about teaching real kids. And we're, really focused on trying to build tools to scaffold transfer and support transfer and also to study it. Um, so that's kind of the heart of our model. It's about teaching, but it's also what comes before and after teaching so that we promote learning that actually sticks for teachers. And then I will just note that, like Lisa, I'm in the midst of thinking about how we can transition this work from a mixed reality platform where we have an actor who's controlling the virtual avatars. That's how the immersion platform works. It's a virtual classroom interface, but there's a real person behind the screen, serving as a digital puppeteer. And so I am in the middle of work in partnership with Immersion, with funding from the Gates Foundation and the Schusterman Foundation, to build AI-driven student avatars and also AI-driven coaches who can kind of do the work that we've seen is so powerful from human coaches in ways that are not, when you're working with human coaches, there are a lot of resources that are required. So this to me is really exciting in thinking about trying to bring these ideas and these innovations to scale. So we're just getting started. We have a curriculum of 70 mixed reality simulations at UVA, and the goal is to work towards, a similar kind of curriculum of AI-driven simulations and coaching experiences for teachers on both the math and literacy side. But excited to be in conversation with all of you about all of that.
Thank you. Rhonda, you're muted.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Rhonda Bondie. I'm a special education associate professor at Hunter College in New York City. And I'm so happy to be here talking about simulations. I began my career as an artist in residence, working right here in New York City, all in 18 of the 32 school districts in all different classrooms, P through 12. And that experience led me to become a classroom teacher. And I spent a few decades as both a special educator and general educator, switching grade levels and roles about every 5 years or so. So now I prepare teachers with that foundational experience in the schools, and I spend the bulk of my time as a researcher in schools with teachers and students. Um, I think because I'm at home there, having spent most of my life, either as a student or as an adult, teaching in the schools. So I became interested in simulations when I began working with Chris Didi at Harvard, and uh, we, uh, he challenged me to think about simulations that cost like 20 cents and used index cards to prepare teachers, as well as very expensive technology. At the time, we were using immersion, virtual reality, all different kinds of technology tools, and really thinking it was such a great moment for me to think about uh, old technology like paper index cards in a board game being an actual practice simulated environment where teachers could practice collaboratively with each other, developing important skills and uh, preparing themselves for the intellectual work and decision making that happens in the classroom through a strategic board game. And so then when I started looking into the technology, of course, I immediately came upon the work of Lisa Dieker. And then I met Julie, and we were able to replicate, use a lot of the tools that Julie has published and has out there to think about, like, how could we extend that work by thinking about, could we personalize and differentiate simulated practice in teacher education? So, based on that pre-experience, could we determine a need that the teacher has and tailor the simulation to that need? And within the practice, what would happen if teachers had an opportunity to control time, if they had an opportunity to restart and practice from the beginning? But what would happen if after the coaching, they also had an opportunity, besides to restart, to keep going, to start where they left off? Or to try something completely different, to try transfer what their learning is to a new task. Um, so we looked at differentiating and personalizing the practice, uh, giving the teacher a little bit more agency than what they typically have in a planned simulation in a controlled trial research study. And we also looked at what are the differences between novices developing skills and experienced teachers developing skills. Because one thing I've realized over my career is how important it is for teachers to continue the intellectual development of the profession, to really become experts, and to continue nurturing their expertise throughout their career. And we don't do this just by attending things and listening and inputting knowledge, but we also have to integrate that into our practice. And experienced teachers get very little rehearsal time, very little practice time, and very little effort spent on the hard part, which is unlearning a habit that you've developed and replacing it with something that you aspire to or that you feel will be more effective or impactful. So I spend a lot of my time here in New York City focusing, of course, on preparing special educators. We're in dire need of more special educators. So with novices and even at the high school level, nurturing people into the field who might be interested in education. But then I also spend at least probably more than half of my time with experienced teachers and how can they use rehearsal and practice to nurture their professional expertise throughout their career.
So we're just really excited to have the three of you as our experts today. I'll ask the first question before I turn things over to my co-hosts. So one of the hats that I wear is Associate Director for Research in the National AI Institute for Adult Learning and Online Education, which is basically workforce entry and upskilling. And I've learned a lot from my colleagues about adult development and adult learning over the 4 years of the Institute so far. And one of the things that strikes me is, I'm going to make a statement here that you're welcome to contradict if I'm off target, but you have sort of a bimodal population. On the one hand, you have teachers who are pre-service, who are just starting to learn about what teaching is, other than having been subjected to it as a student. And typically, those are people who are fairly young. And on the other hand, you have experienced teachers who um, tend to be older and tend to believe that they understand a lot about teaching, which is true, but not all of what they understand about teaching is necessarily optimal. And I'm wondering if, from an adult learning perspective, you use somewhat different strategies, each of you, with those two groups and maybe with whoever you would categorize as being in between. Because what research in adult learning shows is that on average, we lose some agility in our thinking as we get older. But on the other hand, we have this very rich body of life experience that allows drawing on examples from prior work in order to understand what to do next. So whoever wants to take the first swipe at that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm happy. It's a great question, Chris. And, I think Rhonda set us up for it, in talking about the different kinds of groups of teachers who might need different things in simulated practice and other forms of rehearsal. So I'm happy to chime in and then, can pass it off to Lisa and Rhonda as well. So um, most of my work has been with beginning teachers, with people who are, in years, like in either pre-service context or the first 3 years in the classroom. And I think for them, what we've learned is that they need quite a lot of background knowledge building before they engage in the simulation, so that they can feel ready to kind of focus on the skill that they're supposed to be focused on, and that the kinds of coaching that they need, it tends to be quite directive. They really do want to kind of be told how to do things better. And that we've done a lot of experiments where we compare that approach, this very directive coaching model, to more guided reflection. And guided reflection just definitively does not work as well for beginning teachers, even though we like to use it a lot in education because it is very low cost. Um, when we're working with more experienced teachers, and I have a couple of studies, not as many, with more experienced teachers, with mentor teachers um, in particular, who are supporting beginning teachers, I think that you do have to do a different kind of work in terms of trying to leverage their own expertise, even if you're trying to support unlearning, to use Rhonda's term, and kind of reinvention of practice, that there has to be this sense that you're in fact capitalizing on and building on things they already know. And so the work we've done has been around, and I'm doing this work with colleagues at Teachingworks, and so they get the credit because they're very expert at working with teachers across the developmental trajectory. And what they've done a great job doing is in the simulated practice sessions, asking the more experienced teachers questions like, if you were to talk about this with a beginning teacher, what would you think about doing? So it starts as more of a conversation where you're kind of leveraging expertise, where you're positioning them as expert. And then from there, going to a space of would you consider, have you considered? So again, more question asking with an eye towards where you want people to go. But I think the positioning, the framing needs to be quite different, and really positioning them as experts who might have new things to share with, more novice teachers. But I'm curious to hear how Lisa and Rhonda have been thinking about this too.
Yes, I think one thing I'll say is I think it used to be that new teachers tended to be younger in chronological age. And I think it may depend on where you live, your community. But like, for example, here in New York City, we have a lot of career changers. So we have quite an age range. And in fact, I think at Hunter College in the CUNY, the City University of New York, I think we have more career changers than we have younger people, oftentimes in our initial certification programs. So it really starts to change this idea around practice that we've had. And I'll tell you the thing that I've been exploring with the teachers is using ChatGPT. And we've crafted some prompts asking ChatGPT to play the role of a student. And what I find is, especially for career changers, for experienced teachers, especially, um, they practicing with ChatGPT, it's you can take as long as you want before you say your response or type your response. And when we listen to recordings of experienced teachers, they'll take 10 seconds before crafting a response. They'll use the handout. Like, for example, one of the skills that we're working on is a reflective statement. Listening to a student and then reflecting back, not parroting back, not repeating, not hearing, but listening to the meaning of what the student said, and then focusing attention on a productive area for a next step forward. So it's shining a spotlight on a forward motion. That's a very difficult skill to listen for meaning and to guide student attention to an opportunity. Uh, it takes a long time to practice a skill counselors have, right? But teachers need to be able to do it while passing out papers, having the door interrupted. There's a lot of things going on that take cognitive load away from the opportunity to really think about what you're going to say and to craft a high quality, meaningful, impactful response to a child. So what we find is ChatGPT, these slow practices, is just a very small instance, but you're just practicing how you're going to respond to the students, but you can take 10 seconds in what you would normally take less than a second to do in a classroom to practice the language, just practice getting that going. And the teachers have really, really enjoyed ChatGPT. It's totally free and easy to do. Then you can analyze those transcripts for the extent that ChatGPT actually acted like a student. Is this what you would expect? What are you expecting? What does it say about my expectations of what the student would say? What can I say about my own language with the students? Can I annotate the different types of responses I gave to the student? So it gives the teachers a really lovely low stakes practice opportunity that can be repeated as much as they want. So I've really enjoyed, and then teachers think of different prompts of interactions and challenges that students have presented, and we can share those and try each other's. And it's just been a lovely part of really just thinking about not rehearsing a lesson or rehearsing a whole strategy, but practicing just one thing, like providing a reflective statement.
And, Chris, I'm going to answer your question in a little bit different vein because Julie and Rhonda have done such a great job in the work that they're doing. I've been kind of more, I'm going to call myself the chaos person, because I'm in special education and yet I've worked across math and science. And so I'm going to give you three different answers. When I'm working with career changers, that's actually what we created it for. The Lockheed Martin Academy, Lockheed Martin paid for math and science disciplined people. Like when the space shuttle stopped, we grabbed people from there to become middle school and high school teachers. Well, all of you on this call can guess what their number one problem was. It wasn't they didn't know the content knowledge. They didn't have a clue how to deal with middle school kids. And so that's why the first simulator was created in middle school to manage behavior. So I have found that the best spot for using the simulator at all levels is a place of uncomfortableness, something I'm not very good at. For our Lockheed Martin K-8 teachers who are expert teachers that were giving a master's degree in math and science, we put them in and focused on error patterns. We did a lot with Ashlock's work and said, go in and they're like, what do we do with these error patterns? We're like, that's your job. You figure that out. So I've used it a lot more and uncomfortable. And right now, as the at KU as the Williamson Family Distinguished Professor, I get to go back to undergrads, which I haven't done in years. And I have general ed teachers going in the simulator, and I have been using it for them to, it's their very first experience. Talk about deer in the headlights. They have never ever been in a classroom period in most cases. I put them in triads so they're not uncomfortable. I let them write a lesson using AI. I don't tell them anything, which is terrible. But it's fun to watch and it's fun to hear them reflect, because then afterwards I'm like, okay, AI made your lesson plan. What's wrong with it? They're like, oh, it didn't do anything with the kids. And at the end, almost all of them say, we forgot to ask the kids their names. I'm like, yeah, that might be the first thing to do in teaching. I then send them back later, and then I pick targeted students to do targeted things like tell a parent their kid has a disability, tell the parent their kid's suspended, and let them watch each other. And I've made it more of a culture experience for the undergrad class, and that's been really fun for me. So that's kind of the three levels I've seen.
Wow. Well, this is the nuanced answers that you've given are really, really interesting. There's a lot here to unpack. Punya.
Well, Chris, like you said, there is a lot to unpack. So I have so many questions, so many things that I can go. But a quick comment, Rhonda, just building on what you said about using ChatGPT. So one of the things that people talk about AI is that it makes up stuff. Actually, these simulations are fantastic because they make up stuff. So I do these where I have a prompt, which is something like play a student who has a misconception about, let's say, evolution as being teleological in nature. And I'm going to play the teacher and we're going to have this conversation. And in the prompt, I say, take on a different personality every time. And so you get these different responses, and it's such a low stakes sort of way of exploring. And it becomes fascinating. How do you convince somebody who thinks that evolution is, let's say, purpose driven? What kinds of questions can you ask them that pushes them to forces the student to discover the paradox or the tension in their worldview? That's really hard to do. And to be able to do that repeatedly with different personality types that pop up. I've also done these ones where for teachers or for even for school administrators, how do you have a difficult conversation with a parent? Or with another teacher. I mean, these become such wonderful ways of just practicing, which otherwise, if you're a teacher, the first time you would confront that would be in a real classroom, and you would have so few sort of tools in your toolkit, so to speak. So that really resonated with me. The other comment that I had was, again, I think you mentioned about starting with index cards, and now we are talking about AI. I think one of the beautiful thing about simulations is that fidelity that we often care so much about is actually not that important. You people will get into a role playing thing quite easily. It sort of comes naturally to us. And so that's why I think some of these things become quite effective as sort of trial for different things. My question, though, was, Julie, something you said, and I would love for you to unpack that a little bit and for others to add anything that you want to. That this idea that mere practice is not enough, I think that is such a profound point, that all of us who are in education sort of we recognize that fact. We know just repetition doesn't get you there. We have a lot of evidence for that. But I think that is sort of unnatural for people who are outside of education. So would love for you to talk a little bit more about what you have learned about what is the nature of that reflection on these conversations or simulation that you're working with, that go beyond merely repetition, that this idea of unlearning, of identifying that one can get into these routines which are actually detrimental, and how do you get people to confront that? I think that's such a powerful idea, and as a theme, which would love for you to unpack that. And of course, Rhonda and Lisa, you are welcome to expand and add to that, as you see fit.
I appreciate the question. I'm happy to talk about it because I think people will talk to me a lot and say that I'm an ed tech researcher or that I study simulations. And I have to remind them over and over again that I study teachers, that I'm a teacher educator. I'm a former elementary school teacher, and that this work is really about improving teaching for me. And so when I started the work, the very first research question I had was around coaching because, my prior was there's no way that just practicing these things, especially things that you've never done before, like facilitating conversation with a caregiver, that there's no way that just practicing that over and over again is going to lead to improvements. So we built a coaching model based on the coaching literature, which is quite extensive, and then also on Erickson's work around deliberate practice and the kinds of contours of feedback that people across kinds of professional fields benefit from as they're learning new and complex skills. So our coaching model involves, asking teachers a contrasting question at the very beginning after we do the kind of nicety of like, how did you think that went? What do you wish you could have done differently? And we start by asking them, if you had done X, what do you think would have happened? So again, to try to have them take kind of ownership over thinking about the implications of their instructional decisions. That's the heart of the model, is that it's not just telling teachers what to do, it's really pushing them to think, in deliberate and intentional ways about the effects of their instructional decisions. That even our coaching conversations involve extra rounds of practice. So we role play in the coaching, because the theory is right that the more times you do something with a more expert other, the likelier it is that you're going to develop the skills. And the third thing that I think is actually the most critical is that all the work is aligned to what we've called skill progressions that we build in advance of the simulations. That I don't think practice is particularly useful unless you have a real strong sense of what you're working towards. And that's true for both the person who's scaffolding teacher learning, in this case, the coach, but it's also true for the teacher. So everyone starts with this sense of what good looks like. And the coaching conversation is then oriented around that. That I think without that kind of, North Star, unless teachers really know what good looks like, what they should be working towards, I think, the likelihood that they're going to get better is much, much smaller. I think it might happen. But for me, I'm trying to maximize the likelihood that something happens. So all the materials we develop are aligned with rubrics, and are aligned with instructional videos of real teachers in real classrooms doing the thing quite well, are aligned with what my colleagues at TeachingWorks call the decompositions of practice, where those kinds of teaching skills are broken down. So again, this idea that without goal clarity, practice and support is kind of for naught. So those are kind of the key principles that orient like the rest of the coaching work that we do.
And I'm just going to build on that because, again, I agree 1,000% with Julie and the work she's done with such great rigor. Like I said, we did that kind of research originally, and we really built it on the ARC cycle for expert teachers. So that's, I think, where Julie has built such a beautiful model for undergrads. With expert teachers, what we found is that they have to have data on their performance and reflect on their own data. And I think that's been missing in a lot of the work that's been done in even role plays or what have you. And I think that data driven, being AI produced, will be an interesting next step in the future, so that now I'm done. And that's what we're trying to do. We have a grant called the Flight Sim Coaching Grant, where we can tag targeted behaviors, but we also can do automated facial analysis. We can do heart rate, and starting to look at some of that neurophysiological data, letting an expert look at it. Novices, I agree with you, Julie, need that hand holding. And then the last thing I'll say, and if Rhonda has something there to add, is that, that undergrad experience has really taught me, because I only get two chances with them because they only get one class in special ed. So I have to be careful that it doesn't become just a simulation class, but that one class becomes the place for them to first make some mistakes. And then we've already talked about growth mindset and getting to know your kids. And when they don't do any of that as a group, it's that group mentality that really pushes. Their performance is so amazing at the end. And they do reflect on it. And it's the rubric that goes with it. Like, did you do this? And they're like, no. So I think it's those things at the undergrad. I think at the expert level, it really is giving them that data and coaching. But I think coaching in that cycle is really important no matter what.
Yeah, and I'll add to that when we're thinking about the goals for these practice, I always like to focus teacher attention on the change in student learning, student feeling and experience, their response that you're really after. So it's not so much about how much of any one thing that you've done. We've taught you some things as a toolkit to go into the simulation, but what your goal is the impact on student learning. And so to really focus on the student response as the outcome and the goal is the impetus for your interaction. And then through your interaction, what is the change that in students? And to use that as the metric and the common goal, that's what we're after is this change in student learning. And I think that that is a really important goal versus I think early simulation and teacher education often counted teacher behaviors. We saw the teachers improved in their behavior from this to that without regard to teachers' attention to the impact of those behaviors on students. I mean, it's justified in the sense that we know certain behaviors are very productive, but we want teacher attention in their practice to be on the impact of their interactions with students, not just on the action itself. Like I asked the high level question, I don't know why they learned. We don't want to encourage that kind of thing in practice. So I think that's a really important focus of the practice.
Thank you very much. I have a lot more, but I will pass the baton to Kurt, who's waiting patiently, and then Lydia. And if we have time, I'll come back.
Okay, so I have a very short story and a question, and I have a real quick follow-up question that you can help me out with as I create a syllabus on emerging technologies in a week on simulations and games. So, Lisa, I found your story real interesting, your career path. We've had a couple of folks from Central Florida on 4.5 years ago. I had to look this up. It's episode 69 for the end of July 2021. We had Chuck Zubin and Patsy Moskow from the Research Initiative in Teaching Effectiveness. And I wrote to Chuck this week. He's in his 56th year and I said, sorry, Chuck, could I ask a favor? I know you're retired. And he quickly wrote back, I am not retired. I've switched my job role. He's got a different job role now, but he's still on the payroll. And I know both of them quite well. And also Kansas folks, we know that Kansas is rich in assistive technology research and behavioral research with technologies in education. My former office neighbor, Barbara Bickelmeyer, is now the provost at Kansas. So yeah, we say hi to her for me. So I arrived at Indiana University in August of 1992 when the building opened to be a technology demonstration site in education. And walked in the doors, they're taking tape off the elevators when it happened. And my department chair says, your first doctoral student, his name is Robert Fischler. I said, okay. Robert, he took 7 years to do coursework. He had some family issues and whatnot. He did get through. He took 7 years to do his dissertation. But he built a simulation called Sim Teacher in the process and tested it out at UT Austin at the time. It's fairly low fidelity, but as Punya said, we don't need a lot of fidelity to get students in rich conversations and reflections and active learning opportunities. And the only thing about it, he finished and he got done, but he found a job at Southwest Airlines as a flight attendant while writing his dissertation, and he's never left. He wrote to me like 2 days ago. So it's the first time I've talked to him in a decade. He just wrote to me. So loving, so all this time, 14 years, and he went off. He wants to run marathons in different cities around the world. So, anyways, that's his little side story. So my question then is, opposite of Punya's comment, opposite of my comment, Are there things, his was 20 years ago, exactly, 2006. So this is 20 years later now. Are there things that you have explored, you have built, you have hoped for, you have dreamed that are on the higher end of fidelity for these simulations? Are there things in your grants that you're writing and proposing? Are there things that you have gotten funded in the past couple of years that are addressing getting things more rich and engaging and so forth? What are those elements? What are those things that you're hoping to do? And does AI have any impact on what your ideas, on the possibilities out there, on what we might see in the next couple of years in terms of simulations for pre-service teacher education, in-service teacher education, or any kind of training and learning situation as a whole? Um, does anyone want to just jump in on that? And I do have a follow-up quick question. So Julie, you've unmuted first, so you go first, Julie.
Okay, I'm like Lisa and I were down to the buzzer. Who was going to go first?
Ding.
So I'll be quick. Fidelity is kind of at the core of my model because, as I said at the beginning, we're using these simulations not just as a practice space, but also as a standardized assessment platform. So we're using the simulations as a way to understand teacher skill development. So they have to unfold in the same, to some extent, the same way over time to be able to make the kinds of claims that I want to make across large populations of teachers. So the studies that we're doing are typically with a few hundred people. And so fidelity is hugely important. We have extensive fidelity checklists that we work with the actors on. I have big timers in my actors lab because this idea of opportunities to respond is so critical to the work that pre-service teachers, in the case of my research, like they have to have the same number of chances to do the thing we want to see them doing, and if they don't, we can't make comparisons across them. So fidelity has been very top of mind for me in my work. We're just moving into the AI space with immersion, the degree to which we can have those same kinds of expectations for fidelity. I think it's an open question. There are ways in which I think, we might be likelier if we can prompt the model, with kind of specific kinds of guardrails in place to ensure kind of consistent implementation, over time. There are ways in which maybe that's easier than trying to get an actor to do the same thing, hundreds of times. But I think we're not sure yet. And I think as we're moving into this new space where the interface is going to look quite different, the learning experience is going to look quite different, I'm increasingly moving away from using the simulations as an assessment platform for those reasons, and trying to figure out if there are other kinds of technologies I can use to be able to get those same kinds of insights about teacher skill development pre-post to any kind of experiment I want to run. But Lisa, I'm curious how you're thinking about this too.
Yeah. So, well, and I also real quick, Kurt, have to tell you that Chuck Dubin led that group of 4 faculty that focused on simulation. So I adore Chuck and Barb.
I figured.
Yeah. And Barb is stepping down as provost. So I'm excited to have her as a colleague and invited her into the simulator already. So it's nice to know similar people. So very excited about that.
Small world.
Yeah, a very small world. But, I agree with Julie 100%. And again, I think undergrad wise too depends on the purpose. Like if you're have them for a discipline that your job is to prepare them for the discipline. Whereas I, for example, have them for every kid with a disability they're ever going to see. I think fidelity looks a little differently. So one of the things that I try to do is think about when is this simulator being used for experiential learning, just to have an experience and to reflect on it, versus when am I trying to do it to fidelity? And I actually think the new fidelity will come from AI, not just maybe taking an interactor out of the loop, but actually AI giving you the feedback. So I'll give you an example. If you go to the doctor and get blood work, you don't sit with a doctor and they put it under a microscope and you spend 5 hours deciding what's in your blood. It gets sent to a lab and 2 days later you get this really long list of 500 things you didn't even know were in your body. And then you and your doctor make a decision. I actually think all the biometric work that's emerging with the Oura Ring, the the polar we're using, facial tracking, eye tracking. I've been playing with the metaverse glasses, trying to break those will give us two things to do. Just like your doctor says, I'm going to coach you on a better diet, or I'm just going to give you a pill. Which one do you need? Do you need direct instruction or do you need time? I think the same is going to happen with teaching. That analytics of multimodal data on top of the simulator where we can do RCT studies, we couldn't do that with real classrooms as easily. We can then use that to kind of make prescriptions of what teachers need next. So that's kind of where I'm going with fidelity. I think AI is going to give us the fidelity in the analytics, and the simulator is going to give us a platform to be able to do that even better. So.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, Lisa, what you were saying, I want to double down on the idea that the simulations do provide in a controlled environment that is impossible to create in the schools for research. But I think that's very different than teacher education. And I think they get mixed together, maybe too much because of funding and grants are necessary for the research. And then to get the participants, the research is then done in teacher education programs where everyone's required to take a course or participate or required to participate in the professional development. And I think that's unfortunate because teacher education should be personalized and differentiated in the way that we want students to learn in schools. And the problem is that all of the new and exciting things that teachers are offered are usually part of these studies where they're getting kind of a standard controlled experience because we're trying to study that. And so I think like a real challenge in teacher education is disentangling a little bit uh, so that teacher education can be richly differentiated and personalized, or really tackling the issue of how can you do a study with fidelity where teachers are provided with personalized learning that's appropriate for where they are in their career and their goals with regard to the context of where they teach.
I want to go to part two of my question, but first I need to point out that the student I mentioned, Robert Fischler, he did a marvelous job. I didn't mean to demean him in any way. He did two dissertations in one by building the sim teacher tool itself and then testing it. That's why it took 7 years to do that. I give him loads of credit. He's a brilliant guy. Even though he decided to go an alternative path later on. So my follow-up question, bring over Julie's comment on the checklist, but for all of you, week 4 of my class this spring on emerging learning technologies is on simulations, games, immersive worlds, VR, and week 5 and so forth. So it's coming up. Is there anyone that you should recommend that our listening audience out there should read from? Any new studies out there? And Julie, where will they find your checklist, your fidelity checklist? So who are the key players out there? Who are the people who keep track of and keep their eye, and who should I include in my syllabus?
Well, I think for fun, you can include in your syllabus to play the agility game, which is on the Agile Teacher Lab website. It's called Agility. You can make your own with a free Google Sheet template, or you can buy a professional printed version, or you can play it online. And we have just a little JavaScript. But it's a fun game where teachers pick an if challenge. If students X were absent, didn't hear the directions, vary in reading comprehension ability. And then teachers get then cards with different evidence-based teaching practices, and they have to cobble together a complex response. So it's not just one card, but can you cobble together 3 cards out of the deck you have? You don't have out of the hand you've been dealt. You don't have every strategy in the world, you only have those. And then the teachers discuss, each teacher discusses their solution. The teachers together, the players, if there's 3 or 4, pick just one solution that they think would move the students forward in their learning. And then the students move forward in their learning based on the colors that are at the bottom of the card. So not all students move, but students move and the amount they move, stand still, or possibly go backward is randomly selected in the game because even our best teaching practices don't always uh, result in an expected outcome. And each strategy card takes so many minutes out of a 45-minute lesson. So as the rounds go, you start to have less time and certain student groups that you want to move. And so then you're looking for the strategies that would best move those students and trying to put those together in your lesson. And it very much simulates the kind of intellectual decision making that teachers need to do on their feet as learning unfolds. So I think it's really fun to play, and it's especially fun for educators to then think about their own if challenges. What are the if challenges they're experiencing? And I find that especially novice teachers, they think that they're the only person who experiences that challenge, and they're experiencing it because of a lack of skills or experience. But when they play it in a game and they realize that everyone's having if challenge, it really starts to frame challenges not as something you want to avoid or that makes you feel bad, but challenges is the work of teacher education, engaging with the challenges and expecting them and actually looking forward to them. So I encourage you to play agility or make up your own simulated board game, which is fun. It's different than the other simulations that are often done alone
I
to
like it. Yeah, yeah. I think
practice working together.
I might try that. I am going to try that actually. I might contact you after the show, Julie or Lisa.
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick answer. I would go to Consensus. If you haven't been using the AI Consensus app, it will do the best systematic review and give you the top people. And I really enjoy that it gives me outside of education. I feel like it doesn't represent us as well. But, it gives you some worldwide kinds of thoughts. And then I strongly suggest that everybody be looking at, Julie's work, of course, and Rhonda's work, but there is a new World Education Research Association, IRN, that has emerged on this topic with Orna Levin and Israel and Maria Angelini in Spain. And there's a whole group of international researchers looking at teacher education that I'm a part of too. So I feel like global is always good because, again, you've got the two people I would read, and there's others too, of course, but I'm saying if you're looking to go beyond who you've met here today, I think that's also really good. There's a lot of people playing in the space. Australia's got a really strong undergrad presence too. So the WERA IRN has everybody listed that's kind of doing that work across the globe.
Thank you. And finally, Julie.
Sure. So I agree with Lisa that a lot of the work that's coming out right now that I think is really exciting is coming out from spaces outside the U.S. Dirk Richter has a huge lab in Potsdam in Germany where they're doing a lot of really exciting work with headsets, which is a different kind of simulation entirely. And then I want to give a shout out to my colleague Jing Liu, who runs the Center for Educational Data Science and Innovation at the University of Maryland at College Park. And he is, I think, one of the leaders in the US in trying to think about the insights we can extract from various forms of data, including simulation data. And so he and I are collaborating on a project where he's looking at multimodal data from our simulations and trying to understand more systematically the way that teachers are responding to student avatars in terms of how they kind of entrain or mirror what the things that the kids are saying, whether or not there becomes this kind of flow dynamic between the student and the teacher in ways that we know in other fields are quite important for building relationships. And so I think Jing is at the forefront of this space. And he has a team of computational linguists, computer scientists, and other folks in his center that I think are helping us think in new ways about what we measure, how we measure it, and how we can get those insights as quickly as possible. In terms of getting my fidelity checklist, I'm happy to share them with anyone. They, I think, are in many of my published papers, which are easy to find. And I am also easy to find at the University of Virginia College School of Education and Human Development. I'm happy to talk to anyone about this and how we run our studies. We have protocols that have protocols, and I really believe we do the work when we do it better and in ways that help other people replicate what's already been done and see if it works the same way in different contexts. So would be excited to talk to anyone who's interested.
Thank you all.
Lydia.
Yeah, this is I'm such a joy to meet three of you. I don't know if Chris mentioned this to you earlier. My dissertation was based on mixed reality simulation on immersion. And Chris also introduced me to the world of simulated learning and immersion. And as he mentioned earlier, I was a practicing teacher myself, and I immediately recognized the value in doing such simulation for teachers, whether they are pre-service or in-service. Because it really kind of bring the best worlds of fast thinking that we need to do constantly in the classroom, having that muscle memory, and as well as slow thinking to really unpack those important moments. And as Rhonda mentioned earlier, to really unlearn some of those problems, maybe not the maybe maladaptive, habits that we have. And I cite all of you in my dissertation as well as my paper. So I came to the room, was like, oh, I recognize all of those. And thank you for the amazing work that you do. It really, really inspired my early work, especially when I just started doing my PhD. I just remember citing all of you, and then you're all in my recently published paper, actually on using mixed reality simulation to help teachers change their discourse pattern when leading a classroom discussion. And so again, just super exciting. My question for you is related to this notion of using generative AI in like enhancing this simulation experience as well as making it more accessible. As we all know that, having a human actor in the loop bring a lot of richness, but also a lot of expenses. I think that's one of the reasons this is not easily accessed by teachers in the world. So I'm just wondering, what is the current development around using AI for, simulations? What is, and Julie, I think you said, there are still a lot of open questions. For example, to what extent can AI play the role of a coach? What do they really know? Is the coaching they provide like really up to standard? So just a question about, using AI for these simulated experience. Thank you.
I'm happy to get started because I'm very deep in this headspace right now. I think we're going to be there soon. I think the technology is advancing quickly. And again, I'm doing this work completely in very close partnership with Mersion, and we couldn't do it without them. I have a data scientist on my team who also works with immersion data scientists and engineers, that I think these collaborations across the tech developers and people who understand educational context, I think it's essential. So I think one of the biggest issues for the field right now is that more than the AI coach sounds like a human coach, it's that the AI kids sound like human kids. And there are not as many kinds of rich data sets out there of real kids talking about academic work in particular that large language models can draw on so that the avatars authentically approximate what real kids say. So the project that I'm working on with Chris's colleague Heather Hill at Harvard, that we collected a tremendous amount of kid data of kids solving the same set of math problems, and prompted and then fine-tuned models to sound like those kids solving the same set of math problems. They still don't sound like the kids. They still give the answers very, very quickly and in ways that any teacher, it would not pass the sniff test for any teacher. Like they sound like a robot kid still. And so this idea of how we get students in these interactions who actually sound like students, who actually authentically do the work of disciplinary work, in particular, engaging with text, working with math problems, scientific ideas, things of that sort. Getting us to that place, I think, is essential. Otherwise, the simulations aren't going to feel real. And if they don't feel real, I don't think they're going to be that helpful. But I think the technology is rapidly advancing. And I would say that the philanthropic world is really invested in this issue, in building kind of training data sets that I think will help us get much closer to solving this kind of, to me, foundational issue on the AI front.
Yeah, I just want to say that in all of our work that I did with Chris at Harvard and going forward, we always start with actual real student work collected from students doing a task and organize that work in a trajectory from where they are at the starting place and where we want them at the finish, which is beyond all students mastering a common academic skill. The place that you want students to end is where they've taken that academic learning and have found meaning and value within their own interests and their own context and their own learning pursuits. So you actually want students to all end at a different place, holding tightly to the new learning, enabling them to use it in very personal ways. And so I think having all teacher education simulations begin and end in student learning and with real student responses is a critical piece of this puzzle. And not that all student responses are the same at the end, because that's not what we need.
Yeah, and my answer will be short and quick. Two things. One is still interested in what we can learn in the simulator just in general, but can we use an AI agent to replace some of those basic things like parent conferences, things that are lower hanging fruit? And then the second one is we hope to use the biometric data and compare expert novices to create video analysis where any teacher can put their real practice in and it would actually analyze it for stress patterns. So we can start to understand as a novice teacher. My principal now has a dashboard that says you better go see Lisa today because she seems to have the highest stress level, or maybe Lisa then Julie, but Rhonda seems fine today. And again, helping use that to help us stop this teacher churn. That's kind of where I see my legacy in the next step, using the simulator to help us figure out those differences in nonverbal behavior of experts and novices.
Well, as usual, we've run out of time before we've run out of interesting things to talk about. And all of your work is so impressive. And it's been great to have the three of you together because you really build off of one another in ways that show how the field is advancing, not just from individuals locked away working in isolation, but from a community sorting things out together and drawing on different strengths in different areas. So one of my metrics for whether we've had a good episode or not is if I come away with more questions than answers. And I definitely am in that category for today. That's a compliment in terms of what's going on. So thank you. And Kurt, will you introduce next week's episode?
Well, first of all, I have to thank Chris for coming up with some great shows lately, and he has a couple of them coming up. But I snuck in one before a couple of his. That's next week. So if you come, it's going to be a different time, 5 p.m. Eastern time. We'll have MIT folks, Justin Reich and Jesse Dukes, coming from the MIT Teaching Systems Lab, where they have a new guidebook, a guide to AI in schools perspectives for the perplexed. Not done with that. Justin has written a teaser in the Chronicle of Higher Education special issue on AI. Stop pretending you know how to teach AI. Colleges are racing to make students fluent. One problem, no one knows what it means. There are many ways next week's going to link to this week. Come next week, watch it later, and make those connections. We hope to have you join us.